He was the face you never saw, but the characters you'd never forget. From a wisecracking alien duck to one of horror's most iconic killers, Ed Gale was the man inside the madness. But behind those legendary costumes was a life far stranger and far darker than the movies ever revealed. In the 1980s, Gale was Hollywood's best-kept secret, a physical performer with unmatched energy and a gift for bringing puppets and creatures to life. He helped shape some of pop culture's weirdest and wildest moments. You probably never saw his face, but you definitely saw his work. And then, almost as suddenly as he rose, he vanished. In May 2025, the world learned that Ed Gale had died quietly in hospice care at just 61 years old. But for those who had followed his story, that wasn't the most shocking part. Because before his death, Gale found himself at the center of a disturbing scandal. One that left fans stunned, friends silent, and his legacy hanging in the balance. So what really happened to Ed Gale? How did a small-town dreamer go from cult icon to public disgrace? And is it possible to separate the performer from the controversy? This is the strange, complicated, and unforgettable story of Ed Gale, the Hollywood legend you thought you knew. Long before the movie sets and Hollywood lights, Ed Gale's story began in the quiet town of Plainwell, Michigan. Born in 1963, he came into the world with a rare form of dwarfism, standing just 3 feet 4 inches tall as an adult. In a world built for people twice his size, every step forward was already a challenge. But Gale had something most kids didn't: unshakable belief in a dream. That dream started when he was just 8 years old, watching The Wizard of Oz. It wasn't the flying monkeys or the yellow brick road that caught his attention. It was the closing credits. When he saw the name Gale roll by, something clicked. Right then, he promised himself that one day, his name would be in the credits of a movie too. And Ed didn't just dream, he acted. At 20, with no contacts, no job, and just $41 in his pocket, he hitchhiked all the way to California. No backup plan, no return ticket, just raw determination. Most people would have laughed at the idea of a guy his size making it in Hollywood. But Gale didn't just want to roll. He wanted to make history. What he didn't know was that his first audition would be for one of the strangest movies of the decade, and that it would change his life forever. Next up, the role that put Ed Gale in the spotlight, and inside one of the weirdest suits in cinema history. Imagine landing your very first audition in Hollywood, and getting cast as the lead in a film produced by George Lucas. That's exactly what happened to Ed Gale. The year was 1985. Universal was gearing up to shoot Howard the Duck, a bizarre, high-budget adaptation of a Marvel comic about a talking duck from outer space. Most actors would have laughed and walked away. Ed Gale said yes. But this wasn't just a voiceover gig or a background role. Gale had to become Howard. That meant spending long, brutal days inside a bulky animatronic duck suit. The costume was hot, heavy, and had almost no visibility. Multiple puppeteers were controlling Howard's facial expressions while Ed handled the body movements, making it a weird dance between technology and raw physical acting. And Gale nailed it. The movie? A box office disaster. Critics trashed it. Audiences were confused. But over time, Howard the Duck became a cult classic, beloved for its sheer weirdness, and for Gale's commitment to making that character feel real. Off camera, strange things started happening too. Michael Jackson, yes, the Michael Jackson, personally called Ed after watching early footage, just to say how impressed he was. Jackson even wanted him involved in a secret project, though scheduling conflicts kept it from happening. Still, Ed was making waves. He had proven that someone who didn't look like a Hollywood star could still be one, at least behind a mask. But Ed Gale's next role wouldn't just be weird, it would be terrifying. If Howard the Duck made people laugh, Ed Gale's next big role would make them scream. In 1988, Gale was hired for what would become one of horror's most iconic franchises, Child's Play. The character? Chucky, the pint-sized killer doll with a foul mouth and a thirst for blood. While Brad Dourif provided the creepy voice, it was Ed Gale who physically brought Chucky to life. In scenes where the doll walked, ran, or fought back, it was Gale in the costume, crawling through tight sets, taking falls, and pulling off shocking kills. His movements gave Chucky that eerie realism that puppets alone couldn't pull off. It wasn't just stunt work, it was acting through motion. Audiences were horrified and hooked. Gale reprised the role in Child's Play 2 and again in Bride of Chucky, solidifying his place in horror history. He'd become the body behind one of the most infamous villains of the 80s and 90s. But Chucky wasn't all. Gale racked up appearances in cult films like Spaceballs, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He popped up in TV shows from Baywatch to Bones, and even voiced an elf in The Polar Express. Everywhere you looked in genre film, Ed Gale was there, often without credit, but never without impact. He had carved out a unique place in Hollywood. But while the characters were unforgettable, the man inside was starting to fade from the spotlight. And what came next would be nothing like the movies. Behind the wild costumes and cult favorite characters, Ed Gale lived a life that was far quieter and more complicated than fans ever saw. Hollywood gave him fame, but not fortune. And once the camera stopped rolling, he was still a man living with the physical toll of decades of stunts, suit work, and health complications from dwarfism. In his later years, Gale was seen less in the industry and more at fan conventions. He still loved the spotlight, but now it came in the form of selfies, signed photos, and long chats with nostalgic fans. Those who met him described a man with sharp humor, an infectious laugh, and endless stories. But behind that warmth, Gale was fighting real battles. He never married, but was in a long-term relationship for over a decade. In interviews, he called himself a house husband and spoke proudly of domestic life. He didn't have kids, but cherished being Uncle Ed to his nieces and nephews, who remembered his goofy stories and love for games, especially cribbage, which he famously cheated at with pride. But age wasn't kind. As his health declined, Gale began using an oxygen tank and limited his appearances. He joked about it, but the strain was visible. Hollywood had moved on, and for all the smiles he showed in public, the loneliness of fading fame was setting in. Still, no one expected the public meltdown that was coming, because in 2023, Ed Gale's name would make headlines again, this time for all the wrong reasons. In April 2023, Ed Gale's name resurfaced, but not because of a comeback, a tribute, or a forgotten film. This time, it was something no one saw coming. A viral video began circulating online. It showed Ed Gale, sitting on his couch, being confronted by a man from a vigilante group. The accusation? That he had been messaging who he thought was a 14-year-old boy. The group, known for exposing suspected predators, had posed as a teen online. They claimed that Gale had engaged in explicit chats and had arranged to meet the person in real life. And shockingly, on camera, he didn't deny it. In fact, he admitted to knowing it was wrong, repeating the words, "I know it's illegal, and I'm sorry." The video spread fast. Fans were stunned. Some refused to believe it. Others felt betrayed. The LAPD got involved, seizing Gale's devices and opening an investigation. But because no actual minor was involved, and due to Gale's fragile health, no formal charges were ever filed. The case stalled. The scandal didn't. Overnight, the man who once thrilled kids as Chucky became the subject of outrage, confusion, and silence. He stopped making public appearances. His social media went dark. And from that moment on, Ed Gale became a ghost, living out his final days in the shadow of a scandal that never reached a courtroom, but forever tainted his name. And less than 2 years later, he was gone, leaving behind more questions than answers. On May 27, 2025, Ed Gale passed away in hospice care in Los Angeles. He was just 61. There was no breaking news alert, no massive Hollywood tribute, no viral celebration of his career. Instead, the first word came from his niece, who announced his death with a blend of heartbreak and humor. "It is with a heavy heart and a surprisingly light coffin that we announce the passing of our uncle." Fans who remembered him from the 80s and 90s reacted with a strange mix of emotions. For many, it was the end of an era. One final goodbye to the man who gave life to Chucky, Howard the Duck, and so many other cult characters. For others, his death reopened wounds from the scandal 2 years prior. Some tributes vanished as quickly as they appeared. Others were buried under comment sections filled with anger, disbelief, and divided opinions. Even in death, Gale's legacy wasn't clean. The controversy left an undeniable stain, and the fact that no legal resolution was ever reached added to the unease. But those closest to him, especially his family, chose to remember the man they knew, a wild storyteller, a goofy uncle, a guy who cheated at cribbage and never missed a chance to crack a joke. And for better or worse, his work lived on. Chucky never stopped getting sequels. Howard the Duck was still showing up in Marvel cameos. But the man behind those icons? He slipped away with barely a whisper. Still, his story didn't end there. Even now, long after the last curtain call, Ed Gale's work still lingers in the shadows of pop culture. You may not see his face, but you've seen his presence. In horror marathons, cult movie nights, or nostalgic YouTube deep dives, just like this one. And that's the strange thing about Gale's legacy. It's both unforgettable and nearly invisible. He was a trailblazer in physical performance. One of the first actors to truly master the art of full-suit acting, motion capture stunts, and practical creature roles. Without him, Chucky might have stayed just a creepy puppet. Howard the Duck could have flopped without a pulse. Gale didn't just wear the suits. He became the characters inside them, using body language and movement to make them feel real. Beyond the screen, his story inspired others living with disabilities or outside of Hollywood's norm. He broke barriers in a town that rarely offered more than background roles to actors with dwarfism. Ed Gale stood just over 3 feet tall, but he kicked down industry doors in boots twice his size. Yes, the scandal damaged his image. There's no denying that. But for fans who grew up watching his movies, for creators influenced by his craft, and for the genre he helped define, Gale left behind more than controversy. He left behind impact. He may never get a star on the Walk of Fame, but for those who truly know the story, Ed Gale's legacy is more complicated and more important than most people realize. And that brings us to one final question. Ed Gale wasn't your typical Hollywood star. He didn't have the red carpet lifestyle, the blockbuster bank account, or the A-list name recognition. But somehow, he still became part of movie history. Whether you laughed at the bizarre brilliance of Howard the Duck or had nightmares after watching Chucky creep across the screen, chances are, Ed Gale left an impression on you. His story is a reminder of how fame can be fleeting, how talent can go unnoticed, and how behind every iconic character is a real human being. One with dreams, flaws, victories, and regrets. Gale lived the kind of life most people only hear about in whispered behind-the-scenes stories. One filled with oddball movies, Hollywood secrets, health battles, and a scandal that shook everything. But even now, his legacy still sparks debate. Was he a misunderstood icon? A cautionary tale? Both? That's where you come in. Do you remember Ed Gale? What was your first memory of his work? Did you grow up terrified of Chucky, or weirdly fascinated by that duck from space? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your stories. And if this deep dive gave you a new perspective, hit that like button, subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood legends, and check out our next video where we reveal the hidden tragedy behind another 80s cult star. Because sometimes, the biggest characters come from the smallest places.